we're doing this, we're co-hosting this with Chelsea. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa, mixed race, white English, Black Zambian, grew up in a white majority area. Yeah, but Chelsea, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea. I'm from Kenya, but I study in London. I'm currently doing a master's in human rights, and I also run a company called Quails & Co., which is a natural hair or natural 4C hair specifically brand. We also have an Instagram and a YouTube. And I also happen to be Isolt and Lisa's flatmate from when we all lived in France.
Yeah, and my name is Isolt. I know Lisa and Chelsea because we used to live together in France. I'm myself and am French and Irish. I'm a white woman, and that's the position that I'm speaking from. And so for this, I run this page with Lisa, and usually I speak just as much as Lisa, but this seminar, I'm just going to be taking a bit of a step back in order to shed light on non-white voices. And also because I don't feel legitimate in talking about most of the things that will be covered here. So yeah, thanks so much, Chelsea, for joining us. And Lisa, I'll let you get straight into it.
Yeah, so I'm going to start again by just giving you a rundown of what we talked about last week. So as I said, kind of cultural annihilation and how this cultural annihilation was used to upkeep the white supremacist order, the white supremacist structure. So, since slavery, obviously last seminar I talked about the Middle Passage as a metaphor for the vanishing of history. So, since slavery, Black culture has been condemned, it's been stripped away, it's been bleached, in direct kind of ways, well, in very direct ways, but for example, slaves were punished if they were used to if they expressed their homeland in the language, maybe in names or in customs. Last week I talked about how Black people literally, when they arrived in the Americas, their sole job was to work, to be chattel, to be machines. And how do you make somebody the best, or how do you make a person the best kind of machine, the best labor force that you can? You strip away their identity, you turn them into an homogenous object without any attachments to anything. So obviously, yeah, slaves were, as I said, just completely stripped away of any culture that they had, any identity of their homeland that they had. We can also talk about, for example, Native Americans who were forced into boarding schools, which were basically institutions of forced assimilation for Indigenous people to, basically just to be American. We talk about the idea of a melting pot in America, but instead of that, we need to think about almost like a burning pot of burning people's cultures to assimilate. So I guess everything that we discussed last week kind of boils down to the idea that Black people have been placed as, ugly, as stupid, as primitive, as second-class citizens, as unprofessional. Their look is unprofessional. For example, we can look at how today Black children are still being excluded from school for wearing, their natural hair out, or for wearing protective styles. And because this Black identity has been condemned, as I said, from slavery through to colonialism through to today, that Black people expressing their culture is a form of resistance to the white supremacist order. Therefore, when white people appropriate said culture whilst ignoring the systematic oppression and not facing, and doing it and not facing the same treatment and disadvantage that Black and brown people do, it is just a complete picture of white privilege and white supremacy. Because we see the beauty of the culture, but we don't see the pain behind it. And so now I want to just talk about cultural appropriation and define the term. So cultural appropriation kind of came about during the 1980s. The Oxford Dictionary describes it as the act of copying or using the customs and traditions of a particular group of culture by somebody from a more dominant and more powerful group in society. So an American scholar named George Lipsitz, again, like defines cultural appropriation, and he says that he basically defines this thing called anti-essentialism. Oh, sorry. Let me shut my window because there's a train. He basically defines this thing called anti-essentialism, which he says can be, it's kind of like taking somebody's culture, but he said it becomes appropriation when a person or group adopts the culture of a marginalized group without respect or acknowledgement of this culture, and or with the purpose of exploiting the culture for economic or social gain. So to me, I don't know about to you guys, but to me, this sounds very reminiscent of slavery and colonialism. You know, we know that the function of slavery and colonialism and imperialism and capitalism is to attain power through exploitation. So we can talk about, you know, the exploitation of people, you know, as just labor objects, the exploitation of land, literally just like irresponsibly and detrimentally extracting everything you can from the land just for profits. We can talk about exploitation of culture, as we're going to do today. And so if we take this and we equate culture to a natural resource, then we can understand why cultural appropriation is harmful within this system. And, you know, a lot of the time when we talk about cultural appropriation, like some people like to throw the argument, but, you know, we've been exchanging cultures since the beginning of time. And so now I want to go to something, I want to define something called cross-fertilization, and some social scientists go as far as saying, you know, cultural cross-fertilization. Anyway, basically the definition of cross-fertilization, which on dictionary.com is interaction or interchange between two or more cultures, fields of activity or knowledge or the like, that is mutually beneficial and productive. So obviously we'd love to live in a world where we're all, you know, cross-fertilizing cultures, we're all mixing and we're all having this amazing cultural exchange, and, you know, that's beautiful and it's all, you know, mutually beneficial to everybody. But we live in a world which is white supremacist. So there's going to be, the exchange of culture is not mutually beneficial. If you're white, you have a privilege. If you're black, you have a disadvantage. So when you're, you know, exchanging cultures, you're literally grabbing something with your like white supremacy as part of that system. You're grabbing something from the disadvantage. So it cannot be a mutually beneficial thing. And so I want to finish this section by quoting everydayfeminism.com. On an article that they wrote about cultural appropriation, and they say, we tend to think of this as cultural exchange, when really it's no more an exchange than pressuring your neighbors to adopt your ideals whilst stealing their family heirlooms.
Yeah. So now I'm just going to talk about Blackface, just because it's a very like grossly caricatural example. You know, it's yeah, and I think the examples that Chelsea and Lisa will go through later will be a little bit more nuanced than this one. So blackface, I mean, if you're here, I presume you know what blackface is, but blackface is the practice of darkening your skin in order to look like a black person. Back in the day, they used to do that by using either burnt cork or grease or shoe polish. I presume today, because it's still a thing, people probably just use makeup, but the darkness of the skin is often really exaggerated, and so are other physical traits, such as, for example, lips is a classic stereotype, or even body shapes. But these stereotypes don't, like blackface stereotypes, don't actually stop at physical traits. Often blackface is used within a context, which I'll go into in a second, but it often will practically always stereotyped character traits. So for example, either portraying black people as ignorant or superstitious or submissive and willing to serve white people, That's why we often see like these like Jim Crow characters with big smiles and big like lips and things like that. And also they're often portrayed as thieves or sexual predators, especially towards white women. And I just want to say that I'm talking about blackface here, but this doesn't really just stop at blackness. I'm thinking of the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, for example, where Mickey Rooney, who is a white actor, the movie I think is from the 50s, or maybe slightly later. But Mickey Rooney is a white man, and he played an exaggerated Asian character who's it's a very stereotypical role. He has a very strong accent, and he actually did apologize for playing that role. But yeah, going back to blackface specifically, that has been called yellowface in Asian anti-racist activism. But yeah, I just kind of want to give like a succinct history of where blackface originates from and why it's still an issue. So there's no, like, I've seen different dates as to where exactly it originates from. I've seen dates that go all the way back to the 1600s, but generally speaking, the consensus is that it became very popular around the 1830s, specifically in the United States with New York minstrel shows, which became more widespread, I believe, later, or like around the same time, but I think that's where it's from originally. And so in those minstrel shows, they were basically theater plays where white actors and actresses would paint themselves to darken their skin, exaggerate their lips and their figures and their hair. And they would portray these really offensive characters with the character traits that I've just described above. Like, pick anyone, it'll be in one of those minstrel shows. So as early as the 1840s, possibly even earlier, Frederick Douglass, who was a Black abolitionist, he was already condemning blackface at that time. And I just want to like reinforce how popular it was. Even American presidents attended these plays, so it was very, very normalized. And so blackface played and still does play a very important role in creating and in maintaining racial stereotypes about enslaved people in the South of the United States in that context. But it also perpetuates, maintains, and creates in the first place white people's attitude towards Black people and our perception of them. And so this continued way into the 20th century. And you see it on a lot of products. So, you know, Uncle Ben's rice, and Jemima's pancakes in the US. I didn't know that example, but yeah. And also in France here, we have like this chocolate thing called benenya, and same, it's a portrait of a Black man, very like Jim Crow era type stereotype where he's smiling, he's very willing to serve white people. So yeah. And generally speaking, there was a shift from theater to television. And so now what I want to focus on is the 1915 movie, Birth of a Nation. It was also called The Klansman, this film, and it's the first blockbuster film to be shown, was the first blockbuster film, and it's the first film in the United States, and it's the first film to be screened in the White House under the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. It's considered a pillar in cinema for like technical reasons, but it's also considered to be, and still is, considered to be one of the most controversial films in the United States. It was actually extremely controversial even before it came out. And what the film is about is basically it portrays the Civil War and the Reconstruction era following the Civil War and in the United States. So if you don't know, the Civil War in the United States was basically the Union, which is the north of the US, versus the South, which of the US, which is the Confederacy. And the Union was abolitionist, they wanted slavery to end, and the South wanted to keep slavery. So just to be clear, the Civil War was over slavery. That's what the war was about. So this movie takes a very clearly pro-slavery stance, or at least pro-South stance. However, that has to be nuanced because if you look more into it, Abraham Lincoln's position is a bit of an unusual one, except I don't really have time to go into that, but it's an interesting, it's a bit of a confusing movie, but anyway. But in that movie, Black men are always, first of all, played by white men, but they're also all portrayed as either ignorant or, you know, the stereotypes that I described above, but especially rapists and sexual predators towards white women. And at one stage, there's the court case of a man called Gus, who is a black man. And actually that scene is very accurate, because what happens is that he's accused of raping or sexually abusing a white woman. There's a court case, which is virtually no court case. He can't express himself, and all the white people around they pronounce him guilty, and he gets lynched. So that scene is actually quite accurate. But then later, what's more problematic in the movie, I mean, not that that's not problematic, of course, but later in the movie, there are scenes where white children dress up as ghosts, so put on these white garments and go to scare black children. This obviously echoes the Klan's clothing, and keep in mind, the name of the movie is Birth of a Nation, but it's also The Klansman. And this movie portrays crosses being burnt. And that scene inspired a man called William Joseph Simmons to reignite and revive the then dead KKK. At the time, the Ku Klux Klan was actually inactive. And what that man did is he saw that movie in 1915, it inspired him to reignite the KKK, and that man became the second Grand Wizard of the second Ku Klux Klan, the Klan that we now know. So that movie really did reignite this sentiment of, we can do this, you know? So this film is very important in American history and also in American cinema, because it has such a heavy political weight. But I'm talking about the United States because it's important to talk about the US, but also this is real in Britain and more generally in Europe. I gave a French example a few minutes ago, but also in Germany and just, yeah, in, you know, imperial powers, let's say. But also on a global anyway. So in Britain, for example, there is the example of the black and white minstrel shows, which was a weekly BBC program which lasted 50 years, from 1958 to 1978, and it was literally called the black and white minstrel shows. There was blackface all over the show. I mean, yeah, and 78 is really late to cancel that. We can also talk about Little Britain, who have incorporated blackface into their sketches multiple times. They were recently removed from Netflix, so of course that's another example. Then famous actors and actresses such as Shirley Temple, Judy Garland have been seen in blackface. Some have apologized. But blackface is said to have slowed down since the civil rights movement. However, it is still a thing. Often it's dug up from people's pasts that we see these photos, but you know, it's still a thing and it's important to talk about it. I'm thinking, for example, of Justin Trudeau, of the French footballer Antoine Griezmann, who was also posted pictures of himself in blackface. And then I just want to use a German example, which is an experiment by a channel which is actually normally quite good. It's called Arte. And this experiment is by a man called Gunter Wohlruff. I think it's about 10 years old, this clip. And so basically the aim of the experiment was to understand how Black people are discriminated against in everyday life in a small town in Germany. And so what this man, Wohlruff, decided to do was to paint himself Black and go walk around town and see what happens with camera on, basically. And so when he's being painted Black, there are Black people who are present in the room. And so he gets painted, and then he goes to a jewelry shop. The woman is indeed racist. She doesn't act, she's not correct with him. You can see that she's worried that he's going to steal something. She also says it openly afterwards. And then he goes to visit an apartment, and again, the woman is quite, she's not racist to his face, but she's racist afterwards. And so she was racist the whole time. But so yeah, the women that he spoke to were indeed racist. But that being said, I kind of just want to bring up something, and I'm like, are they not also acting weird? Of course, because, you know, racism is a reality, but also because you're a white man painted in Black. Like, you look like a weirdo. I'm not sure I would treat you, like, I think I'd be scared of you too if I saw a white man. Lisa's laughing, I can see you, but you look like a weirdo. And I'm sorry to take a joking tone, but this is actually to bring up a bigger point, which is, why not use a Black person? Simply, why don't you, are we not reinforcing white supremacy by needing a white guy to look at and to show Black oppression and Black discrimination. So you know, if you get a Black person or a person of color willing to share your experiences, it makes way more sense than getting a white man to paint himself Black. That's just weird. So to quote Lisa, Blackface needs to get in the bin.
Yeah, it does need to get in the bin. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next section, which is about like the commodification, fetishization, and exoticism of Blackness. So I want to start off by giving a quote by Bell Hooks, who is a Black feminist. If you don't know who she is, I definitely recommend reading her if you're a feminist and not just a white feminist. And so Bell Hooks says, the commodification of otherness has been so successful because it is offered as a new delight, more intense, more satisfying than normal ways of doing and feeling. Within commodity culture, ethnicity becomes spice, seasoning that can liven up the dull dish that is mainstream white culture. And so this is like a little extract from her book entitled Black Looks, Race and Representation. And this section of the book, this chapter of the book is entitled Eating the Other, which I just feel like is such a good depiction of cultural appropriation, because it's literally devouring somebody's culture, obviously being in a privileged position. And so she gives like many examples within the book, but she has one chapter which is, the chapter is entitled like Madonna, and she talks about like the cultural appropriation of Madonna. So she discusses like Madonna's music video, Like a Prayer. And so this is a video which is, the backdrop is like a Black church. So they have like a Black gospel choir singing in the background, and Black Jesus and all of this. And Hooks argues that this is literally just to make Madonna look, you know, a bit radical, like a bit cool. She also talks about Madonna's use of voguing. And voguing is something that comes from the Harlem, you know, the Black Harlem LGBT scene. And so, you know, we can also talk about the appropriation of Black culture in the white cis gay scene, but, you know, that's a story for another day and perhaps another seminar. But basically, Bell Hooks writes that white women stars like Madonna name their interest in and appropriation of Black culture as yet another sign of their radical chic. You know, tapping into Black culture is deemed alternative, hip, anti-establishment, because you're associated with something that has been characterized as wicked, it's dangerous, unorthodox. Dick Hebdige, who I'm going to talk a lot more about later, but he writes like a similar thing in like his book, where he talks about the appropriation of Black culture by British subcultures. So he writes that the Black man was a constant, serving symbolically as a dark passage down into an imagined underworld, situated beneath the familiar surfaces of life, where another order was disclosed, a beautifully intricate system in which the values, norms, and conventions in the straight world were inverted. And here, you know, he talks about how these subcultures were basically against this, what they called the straight world, you know, the world of, I guess, the establishment. And so picking Black culture as something, you know, that they can then appropriate themselves, that made them seem, that made them feel, you know, radical and cool in a sense. And so, you know, Black culture is dope, yes, but, you know, when you appropriate Black culture while simultaneously throwing away racism and exploitation of Black and brown people, then you are literally just swimming in a pool of white privilege, because, you know, Black people can't just take one without the other. And behind, you know, I said this at the beginning, I'll probably say it again, but behind this beautiful Black culture is pain, and it's a painful history, and it's a history of resistance and rebellion against the white supremacist order. So you can't just, you know, take that and idealize it and fetishize it, which brings me on to now discussing fetishization. So, you know, this element of denial by white people when happily using Black culture is represented in Stuart Hall's definition of fetishization. And so Stuart Hall writes that fetishization is a strategy for having it both ways, for both representing and not representing the tabooed, dangerous, or forbidding object of pleasure and desire. Fetishism involves disavow, which is the strategy by means of which a powerful fascination or desire is both indulged and at the same time denied. What is declared to be different, hideous, primitive, deformed, is at the same time being obsessively enjoyed and lingered over because it is strange, different, exotic. So I would argue that cultural appropriation is it's essentially just the fetishization of the exotic, the charm of the unfamiliar. It's being in love with the idea, with the symbol of Blackness, whilst ignoring the cold, hard truths that you are part of a system of exploitation. And so I want to give an example here of, I go to a lot of festivals myself, and I'm sure, some of you guys do too. And, when we go to festivals, we often see, people, appropriating all cultures. But one thing that a lot of people wear is a native headdress. And so, this, whilst they wear this native headdress, first of all, that headdress is sacred to, indigenous culture. Only certain people wear that headdress. It's not something that's just, accessible to everything. It's a sacred part of their culture, one. And number two, they wear this, but at the same time, what are they doing about the Dakota Access Pipeline? Like, do they care? Are they even integrated with the indigenous population? Do they know about indigenous rights? Because they are standing on the stolen land from indigenous people, but all that matters in that situation is looking nice with a headdress. So this is really a very good example of cultural appropriation, especially with something so sacred as the native headdress. And this is especially insidious when a culture is exploited in order for economic gain. And so, we know loads of brands, I'm sure, which sell headdresses, native headdresses around festival time, and sometimes even Halloween as well. And, this exploitation for economic gain, is that not just slavery? Is that not what slavery was? Literally is stealing for entrepreneurial gain. And to end this section, I want to quote a former professional basketball player and six-time NBA champion, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he wrote in Time magazine that it feels an awful lot like slavery to have other profits, okay, let me read that again, so I've ruined that. It feels an awful lot like slavery to have others profit from your efforts.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for that. I'm going to start the next section, and the next section starts with blackfishing. And so for anyone who doesn't know, blackfishing is defined as an act that's commonly perpetrated by white women in order to appear African or Arab, of African or Arab ancestry, which is simply put, altering your appearance in order to present as a person of color or Black. Celebrities that are included in doing this have been accused of doing this are Kim Kardashian and Ariana Grande, and I'll go into an example later on. I'm going to talk about why blackfishing is problematic. It is because it's considered by some to be the modern equivalent of blackface or brownface, because it capitalizes on the exotic looks of historically oppressed minorities. Despite the fact that the celebrities and the white celebrities who are blackfishing do not seem to be doing it with the explicit intention of mocking and ridiculing Black people, blackfishing in itself is an exploitative practice. And then along with the regular self-tanner products that we know today, like self-tan cream or tanning beds, in the UK, there is this product called the Top Tan injection, which became popular in the late 2010s. Basically what it is that it's a synthetic hormone called melanotan, and it can be purchased online and injected into the skin. And what it does is that it encourages the skin to darken by increasing the amount of melanin in the body or in the blood, in the skin. And the drug itself has several side effects which make it unsafe, in addition to the risks of injecting the drug into the body, which is why it's illegal in the UK. But while I was doing my research, the question came up to my mind, and I would pose this question out to the group of where is the line with tanning, and what is an acceptable holiday tan versus injecting melanin into your skin and trying to achieve a much darker skin tone. The history of tanning is actually quite interesting. The popularization of tanning for white people started in the 1920s, so pretty recently, when bronze skin became more connected to summer and the beach, and more importantly, being able to afford to go on holiday. So tanning became to be a status symbol for mainly middle class white women. And it started to enter the mainstream in between like the 1930s and the 1950s, and started gaining becoming more popular with the introduction of self-tanning products into the market, and the first bikini around the 1950s. And mentioned in previous seminars that Lisa and Isolt have done, historically fair and pale skin was considered desirable historically, and dark skin had been associated with the working class. And in the context of the United States, to use an example, outdoor slaves, and the colorism that built between the indoor slaves and the outdoor slaves in the States during slavery, where because slaves that worked outdoors were directly under the sun, they grew darker, and those who worked indoors grew or remained lighter, especially if we listen to previous seminars into the relations between and the rape between masters and the slaves at the time. This created a lot of animosity between the two groups that we still find in rhetoric today, and discourse between team light skin or team dark skin in the United States today. But during my research, I discovered that it wasn't until the iconic French designer Coco Chanel skipped off a yacht in the south of France with bronze skin in specifically 1923, after she tanned on accident, that these trends began within white women at the time, which I thought was a very interesting point. I think it's a good segue into the modern day trendsetter who we find, Kim Kardashian West. So Kim Kardashian, for anyone who doesn't know, her family and herself have been accused of appropriating Black culture since her leaked sex tape with the Black singer Ray J in 2007. Kim Kardashian currently has over 176 million Instagram followers, and her family's reality show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, brings in an average total of 1.3 million viewers. So I think it's safe to say that the Kardashians are viewed today as the fashion and aesthetic trendsetters, at least for young girls and women of our generation. And more specifically, their body types are aspired to, which typically consist of a big butt, a small waist, large breasts, and more recently with the Kylie Jenner, big lips. I could list all of the different controversies that Kim Kardashian has been in, having to do with cultural appropriation, but frankly, we just don't have enough time. but I would like to focus on two specific examples that have happened very recently. In 2018, for example, Kim Kardashian got cornrows and braids, and she posted a photo of these on Instagram, calling the braids Bo Derek braids. For everybody who would like visual representations of what I'm discussing, I'm going to insert all of the photos in the chat at the end of my section, just so you know. So yes, in 2018, she got cornrows and braids, and she posted a photo on Instagram, and she called them Bo Derek braids. And so she was referencing a white actress, Bo Derek, who starred in a film in 1978, who had cornrows at the time, which is a historically Black hairstyle. Shortly after this, in 2019, Kim Kardashian launched a shapewear brand called Kimono. And with that, she also bought the trademark for the name, so she bought the rights to the name, and this inspired international outrage. As many people know, the kimono is a cultural Japanese garment, and it dates back till the 16th century. There was an open letter written to Kim Kardashian by the Japanese government, encouraging her to imploring her to change the name and understand the inappropriate placement of her shapewear brand on a historical name that is important to Japanese people and integral to Japanese culture. I find that these two examples show that Kim Kardashian is problematic in two main ways. The first is that she perpetrates the selective nature of cultural appropriation within specifically Black culture, and that she has an irresponsible use of her platform, and this is evidenced through trying to capitalize off of the traits of a culture that does not belong to her. My second topic that I'm going to go into is reverse cultural appropriation, and then later on we're going to talk about a little bit of cultural appreciation. But for now, in 2016, Marc Jacobs, the fashion designer, sent his models down the runway with faux dreadlocks, and the majority of these models were white. This incited controversy around the inappropriate use of historically Black hairstyles in fashion and in the workplace in general. Jacobs had claimed that the hairstyle was an homage to Club Kid culture in the 1980s, but he only cited white celebrities when he was making his statement. And this controversy, it gained traction, or it became more heightened, because in that same week, the US Court of Appeals announced that banning dreadlocks from the workplace was illegal. And this raised more outrage around the appropriation of Black hairstyles and how they can be accepted in one medium when done by a white actor, but when done by a Black actor, it can be perceived as differently. And a good example for this was the suit, which involved a Black woman who refused to cut off her dreadlocks. And this led to the company that was giving her a job offer to rescind her job offer. She sued and argued that the company's actions were discriminatory, and she cited the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the United States, which states that the failure or the refusal to hire someone over their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin is against the law. And so she argued that by specifying that dreadlocks were unprofessional, that the company was unfairly targeting African Americans. The company, on the other hand, argued that their workplace grooming policy required employees to present themselves in a manner that project professional and business-like image. And I think that this is a really good example of the rhetoric around Black hairstyles and they're being viewed as unprofessional and unkept in their natural state. And I would pose a second question to the group here, where I would ask all of you, what is the definition of groomed and messy hair? And how are your assumptions influenced by racist stereotypes? I think that the underlying theme within assimilation, when we talk about, within cultural appropriation, is assimilation. And I think that assimilation is the main reason why cultural appropriation doesn't work. I believe that, well, to define reverse cultural appropriation, I would say that it's when a person of color is appropriating European, Western, or stereotypically white cultures through their dress or their hair. For example, by a Black woman wearing a weave or wearing a wig, a straight one, or I don't know, me wearing the shirt instead of my national Kenyan dress. I argue that this has to do with assimilation because, and I'll take the example of South Africa. So South Africa is a country which is around 80% Black within the population. I believe it's just below this right now. However, in 2016 in South Africa, a girl called Malaika Mao-Ayo, I hope that's the right pronunciation, a South African schoolgirl led the march against Black hair discrimination in high schools in Pretoria. And this was after she was told by a teacher that her afro was distracting others from learning. I think that this is a really telling example of, even within a majority Black country, Black women are still being, often Black women are still being told, but Black people in general are being told that their hair is both distracting and naturally wrong, basically. This is really interesting. It's very personal to me because I started my company Coils & Co. I started it over 2 years ago now with a friend, Abena, at the time. And we both found that when we were trying to learn about our natural hair, and this was probably when I started university, so maybe just under 5 years ago, I decided to start learning about how to really treat my natural hair well, how to get it growing, how to not have to wear a wig and a weave and get it chemically straightened. And we decided to start Coils & Co. as a website, and we would write articles to provide education on how to manipulate Afro-textured hair, and provide the education that I didn't have when I was looking for these resources. The reason why the education is lost is because of colonialism. Women and Black people were told to cover their hair. And when they gained the right to work, they started being told that their hair was unprofessional, unkempt, as we said before. And so this culture against Black people, hatred of the Afro-textured hair type, has its roots in colonialism and became a factor of the assimilation into the workforce. It's really interesting because I have a personal experience with having to go to a salon, actually in my hometown in Kenya, which is a small city right next to Uganda in the west of the state. And I went to a salon in in my ends, let's say, and I sat in the chair, and this lady started to comb out my hair with like a dry comb. Now, I don't know if any of you guys know black hair, but I can't get a comb through this. I have to get it wet first and then start combing it from the ends all the way to the root. This is simply how to brush your hair as a Black person. And the fact that I legitimately had to sit there in that chair in that salon and teach the 4 hairstylists who were there how exactly to detangle natural hair that hasn't been chemically straightened. This was a really powerful moment for me, because it was my first experience seeing the fact that the knowledge on how to maintain and care for natural hair that hasn't been straightened in Kenya was completely lost. And it was completely lost to the absolute root, and to the level of which I can be home in my hometown, and the people who are working in salons there don't know how to care for their own hair. The last example that I'll give with assimilation is actually a article that popped up yesterday, which is the announcement that this skin lightening cream called Fair and Lovely, which is sold in the Middle East, India, Nigeria, and Ghana, will drop its the word fair from its name, and amongst the pressure against colorism in India, and also the global pressures that are happening right now with the Black Lives Matter movements on getting companies to reevaluate and change any of their products or their names that could be perpetrating either colorism or racism, or simply just discrimination in general.
Yeah, so yeah, Chelsea just kind of discussed why reverse cultural appropriation doesn't work. It's, the same argument of how reverse racism doesn't work. She talked about, the power within it. But now I'm going to discuss the appropriation of Jamaican culture in the UK, mostly Jamaican culture, but just like widely Black culture. But obviously the UK has a lot of ties to Jamaica. So obviously there's so many things to cover in this section, like we could just sit here all day. So I'm just going to try and give like a brief version of this. So I want to start off by saying that Jamaican culture is resistance, and just Black culture in general is resistance. I talked about in slavery how, expressing your homeland through language, music, customs was punished by the slave masters. So even being able to, practice your own identity, like from your homeland or your own Black identity was rebellion. Earlier, I kind of talked about, well, I've said this many times, but the idea of behind the beauty of Black culture, there is pain. Like, I'm going to keep saying that because, it's very central to this discussion on cultural appropriation, like people just disregarding the pain and just, keeping their eyes on the beauty for selfish purposes, really. And so I want to start off by talking about, like, giving an example of reggae music. So reggae music was formed like as a fusion between buru drumming and Nyabingi chants. So buru drumming was drumming that started on slave plantations to heighten spirits, during like field work. And Nyabingi chants were kind of chants used by like an East African like movement, which was a military movement against colonialism. So in both of these examples, we see the formation of reggae music is literally just resistance. We can see that through the lyrics as well, the dress, everything. When people in reggae songs say "Bun Babylon," like, and everyone sings along, what does that actually mean? They're literally like admonishing the white supremacist structure. And so it is complete rebellion. And so now I want to fast forward to the mid-20th century and talk about how Jamaican culture in the UK was imported alongside the Windrush generation. So obviously, well, not obviously, if you don't know about the Windrush generation, it's basically when migrants came from Jamaica to the UK to help build up UK, like post-war, like UK structure and society. So in our second seminar, I kind of went in depth about how the NHS was literally created on the backs of migrants, and, you know, a lot of the time Jamaican people and people from the Caribbean. And so now I want to talk about a book now I want to talk about a book called Subculture, The Meaning of Style. So this is a book written by a man called Dick Hebdige. And to me, it's just like a representation of cultural appropriation. But obviously, this book was written in 1979, so it doesn't really say cultural appropriation anywhere. But basically, the book traces how British post-war subcultures were derived from Black culture. And, you know, within the book, he points to the teddy boys, the mods, the skinheads, and the punks. And he talks about how these cultures borrowed music, fashion, mannerisms, and language from Black culture, and a lot of the time from Jamaican culture. However, he discusses that at best, this root of Black culture was not acknowledged, and at worst, was violently attacked. For example, he talks about the teddy boys who listened to blues, R&B, jazz, rock and roll, which, you know, we know all derived from Black culture. However, the teddy boys violently attacked and took arms up against many like West Indian populations. We can talk about, you know, the Notting Hill Carnival. I'm sure we all know the Notting Hill Carnival. That was started after the Notting Hill riots, which was incited by a group of teddy boys. So, you know, in this book, Subcultures, Dick Hebdige just talks about this complete contradiction, like taking up this culture, but ignoring it when you want to oppress the others. So he talks about how the subversion of anti-racist resistance, and a lot of the time, specifically, he talks a lot about Jamaican Rastafari and rude boy culture, and he talks about the subversion of this anti-racist Jamaican resistance into racist British values. And he writes that, you know, the adoption of Black culture in working class subcultures strengthened their identity, but, you know, as I said, was just a complete contradiction. So he writes that in the case of the skinheads, things, i.e. dress and value system, taken from the located parent culture were not only transformed when placed within the context of a specific generational group, they were in some cases radically subverted. Again, talking about how they're literally taking a culture of racial resistance or resistance to the white supremacist order and radically subverting that to suit the white supremacist order. You know, we can also talk about, you know, skinheads. It's interesting because skinheads is just like such a dichotomy within itself, because it started off as a movement of working class youths who took inspiration from, you know, Jamaican culture, from rude boy culture, from ska and all of this and reggae. And then, you know, it was at the beginning, there was integration between, you know, the white skinheads and, you know, Black, like the West Indian population. But then gradually, like the skinhead culture itself just became a racist community of people. But the interesting thing is they still listen to ska, they still listen to reggae. Like I recently watched a short film, which I'll post on our resources document after, and the film kind of depicts how like the change of the skinheads from, the change from being, you know, accepting to being racist, and just the hypocrisy of it all, listening to Black culture and taking your style from the Jamaican rude boys, whilst at the same time literally just attacking Black people in the street. It really is that ridiculous. And so Hebdige writes that these cultures are often forgotten and concealed when taken from immigrant populations and adopted into host communities. For example, he says that punk includes reggae as a present absence, a black hole around which punk composes itself. So, you know, punk, he talks about how, you know, punk has many links to reggae culture. However, he cites in some instances, you know, punks try to help out kind of Black culture in some campaigns, but a lot of the time they didn't even acknowledge within their own community that the influence of Jamaican culture and of Black culture within punk itself. This is why Dick Hebdige calls it a present absence. And on the subject of music, you know, bringing up to more like recent times, we need to talk about how underground British-born, namely dance music here, how these genres are inspired by Jamaican culture. Here I'm thinking of jungle, I'm thinking of drum and bass. We can also talk about, you know, techno, although it's not British born, but techno was born, was created by the Bellevue Three, which were 3 Black males from Detroit. House music was created in Chicago by a Black DJ named Frankie Knuckles. And, you know, that's just dance music. Like, that's just dance music. If we look at the whole spectrum of music, we can see that a lot of it like derives from Black culture. We can talk about rock and roll. We, you know, commonly we have this stereotype of rock and roll as a white culture, but no, it came from Black culture. And going back to like the dance music, so there are obviously DJs, or there's some DJs who do acknowledge this relationship, but there are a lot who don't. And there are a lot of people who don't do anything to enhance the Black community. They will DJ, I don't know, jungle, drum and bass, or, you know, house techno, but what are they, you know, doing about Black issues? You know, where is their earned money being spent? Are they actually supporting Black communities? Are they supporting Black projects? Are they even like bringing up other Black DJs? And I want to give an example here of like a recent campaign that's happening right now. So I recommend supporting it if you have the chance. I think there's like a petition, but this is like the Save Nor like petition. And basically, so there's a man called Taylor Williams, and he has a record label with DJs spinning records with Jamaican influence. So for example, a recent release on this label entitled Brother is described as a nod to South London's Jamaican, Rastafarian and reggae heritage in its encounter with electronic music, jungle and their MCs. And so, you know, here like, oh, okay. Well, I need to add that Taylor Williams also is a white male who is also a white male landlord who is now evicting a long-standing Brixton business. So on one hand, you have him, you know, having a record label and actually making money off Black culture, and specifically here Jamaican culture, whilst at the same time destroying and literally kicking out a company, you know, on, you know, that represents, you know, Brixton's diversity. So this is a very like clear-cut example of cultural appropriation, literally exploitation, complete exploitation, you know, taking the aspects of Black culture that you want whilst actually oppressing Black people. And to continue the discussion on appropriation of West Indian culture, we can also talk about the appropriation of patois. And so I'm sure we know people who like to use patois, or like white people who like to use patois in their speech. So patois, it refers to the Creole language in Jamaica, which mixes English and West African languages. So it was a language, you know, created by slaves on plantations as a way for them to communicate. So Mexican novelist Carlos Fuentes talks about the use of language as rebellion. And he writes, "It was in language that the slave was perhaps most successfully imprisoned by his master, and it was in his misuse of it that he perhaps most effectively rebelled." So here he's talking about the, you know, last week we talked, or even today we're talking about how, like, talking about cultural assimilation. So within patois, Jamaican, like, you know, took the slave master's language and rebelled by making their own language and speaking in a way that the slave masters could not understand them. It's literal, again, resistance, rebellion. And so, you know, today patois, and just in history, patois has been referred to as an unintelligent language. there has been movement, and sometimes it's not even referred to as a language. Sometimes it's just, a poor spoken dialect or broken English. But there have been movements in Jamaica for a long, long time fighting for recognition of patois as like a respectable, written language. We can talk about the rise of dub poets, which was when it was like a movement of poets who were writing their poetry in patois as like a rebellion against this white supremacist order that tells them that their language is not in fact a language. So behind, behind patois is just, a cool thing to say. There's this whole history, again, I'm gonna repeat myself, behind the beauty of Black culture is pain. And so I want to end this little section with a personal example. So when I was in middle school, there was a white boy. Well, everybody was white pretty much. I think I was the only Black person in my year at middle school. I think maybe there was like one Asian or something like that. Anyway, that's besides the point. Well, and so there was this one Black boy who, in my English class, he was just like declaring how he was a Rasta because, he likes to smoke ganja and all of this. And like at this time, I knew what a Rasta was because, I grew up in a white area, so I'd like to research, Black culture in my spare time. And so I knew what a Rasta was. I knew it was, Rastafari was a rebellion against the white supremacist order. The whole culture and the whole movement of Rastafari, it's a system of rebellion, it's a system of resistance. And so when this guy called himself a Rasta, it's just a very good example of fetishization and taking like the symbol, the idea, the nice idea of Black culture and ignoring the underlying like oppression. And as well as that, this same boy that called himself a Rasta previously was one boy that used the N-word against me at school. And like the N-word was only used like so many times to me at school, but this one boy was one of those people that used it. And so, on one hand, he's saying, I'm a Rasta, I smoke bare weed and all of this, which obviously does not make you a Rasta. But on the other hand, or like he's literally calling people the N-word and he's literally being racist. So, you can't appropriate somebody's culture and then disregard, the oppression.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that Lisa's making there on the context that I would try to extend through flipping the conversation onto cultural appreciation. So I think that it's important during this discussion for us, both Isolt, Lisa and I, to make clear that we don't have a consensus on what cultural appreciation looks like in every context. And additionally, we don't have a consensus on what cultural appropriation looks like in every context, which is why we've been so insistent on giving specific examples in order to illustrate our points. But to define cultural appropriation roughly is when someone seeks to understand and learn about another culture in efforts to broaden their perspective and connect with others cross-culturally. I'll be making an argument for cultural appropriation through my own experiences, because I believe that cultural appropriation can only happen within cultural appreciation can only happen within certain contexts. And I'll give the examples. So when I finished high school, I was living in India. And so I graduated in a sari because it was the culture of the school. And it was also the culture of most of the student body. I believe that this is an example of cultural appreciation because, yes, I may have had the option, if I felt so strongly, to not wear a sari, but given the context that I was in, I also wanted to participate in this culture. I feel like on the flip side, now that I own this sari and I have it in my closet, I believe that wearing the sari to the store for milk or on a day walking my dog, it would be cultural appropriation. And I say this because I feel that I got the sari for a particular occasion and I wore it in particular context, and that occasion and that context does not exist in the second example. To give another example, I raised this point to Isolt and Lisa. Basically, one of the times when I went back to Kenya while we were living in France, I brought them over some Kenyan clothing. And I believe that giving Isolt pants from Kenya and asking her to wear them is cultural appreciation because as the owner of this culture, Kenyan culture, or rather it belongs to me as well, I want to share my culture and I choose how I would like to share my culture. And I'm choosing to share it through giving both Lisa and Isolt some clothing from Kenya. However, within this, if someone were to see Lisa or Isolt wearing Kenyan clothing, be able to identify that it's Kenyan, and then have a problem, or believe rather that they are appropriating Kenyan culture, this is an opinion that belongs to them. And I guess like we also discussed the fact that, and Issa will make her own points on why it should be respected, but specifically that I am giving my opinion on cultural appropriation and versus cultural appreciation of my own culture. So I get to decide what that definition looks like to me. And within the second example, I would say that this is cultural appreciation.
Yeah, like as Chelsea said, like before this seminar, we were kind of discussing, and you know, me, Chelsea, and Esau have discussed cultural appropriation a lot. Like as we all said, we used to live in France together, and we never come to a concrete answer. Like it's always a grey area, and as Chelsea says, like it's like within a different context and within a different situation, it may be different. I guess like my perspective is that if a black person calls a white person out for wearing their culture, I would say that you need to listen to that black person because, you know, they're the ones that feel the force of oppression in society. Again, it's a power thing. And so I think my perspective is just listening to black and brown voices, and not as a white person, like deciding on your own, like, I guess, what is okay or what isn't okay, because at the end of the day, that, you know, you're not in the culture of an oppressed, yeah. But as I said, it's very like situational, but yeah, we hope that obviously everything that we've said here can kind of make you guys understand a bit more.
Yeah, I think this entire conversation is in movement. There is clearly no consensus, you know. People, yeah, there's no consensus. And I think to add to what the girls are saying now, the only position that I can speak from is my own, which is that of a white woman. And I think concerning that particular example of Chelsea giving us Kenyan pants, I think for me, I'm not here to tell people what to do, you know, but for me, the only thing that I've found I'm able to do is to attempt to incorporate all the points of view that I'm made aware of, that either because I've chosen to seek out that information or because I've been told. You know, I have to incorporate those other people's opinions into my own anti-racist fight. And just exactly as Lisa said, I think, I genuinely think that the only thing I can do, up to you if you disagree or if you want to add to this conversation, the only thing I can do is to listen, which is why we chose to make me take a step back a little bit for this seminar. And the only, I'm just going to add a couple of things to conclude, and then Lisa will conclude again. But this entire conversation boils down to white supremacy. White people, us being able to pick and choose certain aspects of specific cultures, but having the privilege to ignore other aspects of life, of the lives of those people that you're taking and or borrowing from, is inherently white privilege. And that's exactly where we need to be doing better. It's ignoring our white privilege, and that's where we need to be doing better. And so what I want to talk about in this little section is epistemological dominance, which is a concept that is covered by multiple authors who identify as decolonial. One of those authors is a woman called Gurminda Bambra, and I mentioned her in our last seminar on the whiteness of histories and statues and etc. And so what epistemological dominance is the fact that in the West, and by extension the West, and by extension whiteness, has colonized the entire world. And in order to do that, like practically speaking, technically speaking, the methods that were used in order to colonize were slavery, colonialism. Colonialism is only a symptom of coloniality, you know? So slavery, colonialism, and imperialism. But this coloniality that I'm speaking about is what enabled people white people in the first place to think that they could enslave and colonize and rape and pillage. But that is still very present. You know, we've covered this before. We live in a white supremacist system. We eat, sleep, and eat and sleep in white supremacy, and you know, we consume it every single day, and we reproduce it. And so this coloniality has seeped into our minds and is extremely deeply embedded in our worldviews, in our knowledge, like in what we say to each other, and also in our systems of knowledge production. So basically what whiteness has done is gone around for centuries saying that we do everything better, that our way of doing things are better, and you know, deeply believing that and imposing that our ways onto other people's. And so there's a systematic erasure of those other people, of the systematic erasure and genocide of those peoples and of their cultures. And what transpires in the topics that were covered here is that we, white people, can erase and destroy non-white cultures and peoples, and then suddenly decide that we like some of it and steal it. And I think this corruption of whiteness, by whiteness of so many other cultures, and I don't mean corruption of the culture itself, I just mean like the corruption of like taking some aspects of it, that is white supremacy in this conversation.
Yeah, so I just want to make a final end to say that, you know, wearing a daishiki will not end racism. You know, actively dismantling the white supremacist structure by understanding and acknowledging your privilege will. And I want to completely end with a quote from Azealia Banks. So this quote was said at the time that Azealia Banks was calling out Iggy Azalea for cultural appropriation. You know, being a white rapper, Azealia Banks just felt that she wasn't respecting like the culture. She wasn't, you know, paying a homage to Black culture when she, you know, did her thing. And so Azealia Banks says, it's culture smudging. All it says to white kids is, you're great, you can do whatever you put your mind to. And it says to Black kids, you don't have shit, you don't own shit, not even the shit you created yourself. And yeah, so that's where we end our presentation. So as always, we now invite everybody just to give their opinions, like thoughts, questions, like criticisms on anything relating to this topic. And also you can draw on just like topics of racism and whiteness in general. Also, if you want to write like a comment in the chat, you can also do that as well.
I'll take this time to also show everyone the images that I mentioned as well.
Okay. Any burning desire to share, guys? Oh
yeah, wow, that scared me.
Yeah, that was very sudden.
With Nicki Minaj near actual Black woman. You want to see that again?
Oh, those are the braids that you were talking about.
And these are the Bo Derek braids. This is the woman who she's referring to. And this is the lightning cream, Fair and Lovely. The darker woman in the back and the lighter woman in the front. The name there before it was changed.
Okay, we have a question. So how do we end the power dynamics that allows and enables the cultural subjugation and appropriation in its totality? In other words, how do we forever end white supremacy? I mean, I feel like sorry?
End capitalism.
Yeah, that's the thing. I always give that like response. Like personally, I just feel like it goes along with capitalism. You know, capitalism is about inequality. It's about subjugation of peoples. That's what it's about. Capitalism was formed like through slavery and through colonialism. Yeah. So again, I'll say the same thing that I say like every week. I just don't think we can be free of white supremacy whilst we have this capitalist structure. Therefore, personally, I believe, okay, how would we end something like capitalism? I mean, okay.
By abolishing the law.
I don't know that any of us are fit to answer that question to like its full extent.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, revolution in the sense that, I mean, personally, I don't think that we can go inside and infiltrate the system and try and change it there. I think that we literally need to take what's ours and literally just have a complete revolution of the system. I think this system, you know, I've said this in a previous seminar, this system was not designed for Black people. It was not designed for women. It was not designed for queer people, and it was not designed for disabled people. And so this system has been talking for like 400 years above. And so really at this point, we need to acknowledge that we can't, well, personally, I think you can't deconstruct it from the inside. You need to literally just take the whole thing down and create a new one.
I think also through the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening right now, which is calling for institutional change through policy change in governments, through change of cultures and companies, through deconstructing or abolishing the policing state. I think that these are all efforts to change the system that are currently happening now and are currently being evidenced now. And I think that we're already seeing changes, and we have been seeing changes in these past couple of weeks, slow but steady in different places across the world. But I believe that this is a good example of what we must continue and maintain.
Yeah, as Chelsea said, like, you know, even this whole movement to defund the police and, you know, to abolish the police, before maybe a few weeks ago or just over a month ago, if you said that, you'd just be like thrown into the pile of just like radical, like hard leftists who are just trying to corrupt the world. But now people are genuinely taking it on and deconstructing it and analyzing it. And so that's something that, you know, excites me, the fact that people are having these conversations, that the police we're not going to change the police. We've been trying to do, or in Britain, for example, since the Macpherson report over 20 years ago, we've been trying to sort out and reform the police. But what has happened since the Macpherson report? Stop and search has been increased. And yes, we have more Black officers working in the police force, but really, like, institutional racism is still the same. It still literally plagues and corrupts our whole system. So, you know, we've been talking about reform for so long, since, you know, we talk about Rodney King in America. Like, what's happened? People are still out here being killed just because they're black. So in that sense, can we just go into the system and change it? So it's exciting to me that people are saying, no, we can't change that system. We need a new one.
We've got a new question here, which is, what would you guys personally want white people to do to aid the movement, i.e., should we stay silent or should we speak up too, that kind of thing? Would you guys like to speak first? I think I have a few thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, so personally, as Lisa and myself, and I think Chelsea mentioned it too, you know, personally, I think one of the best things that we can do when we're entering this conversation, when we're new to it especially, is to listen. First of all, I don't think, but this is for everything, you know, I think people aren't comfortable with not knowing, you know, and people don't like to admit, you know, oh, I didn't know, or I was wrong, or I am not informed enough to make an opinion. And I think when it comes to cultural appropriation, when, you know, when we're white people and we've grown in the system of white supremacy, which is the case of all of us, how could we be well informed? Or the entire system is catered to misinform us or to keep us uninformed as to how we benefit from white supremacy and stuff. So it's our responsibility to look into that. And personally, actually, when I have these conversations with my friends or with my family, the thing that I have learned from especially Black women who put a lot of effort into talking to white people about whiteness, for example, on Instagram, and I'll post all of these women, and I really, really am very grateful for those women of color's work, because I wouldn't be here without them. And yeah, what I try to do is kind of focus the conversation not on, but this is kind of for more than just cultural appropriation, just focus the conversation on whiteness and on white supremacy, you know, kind of think like, how, you know, how is it that, you know, what are the power dynamics at play? What are the economic power dynamics at play? Kind of try to orient the conversation that way rather, but I don't know, I think it's open for debate. Like, I think we can talk about it, but I think it's very important to listen first, and then to not necessarily center on whiteness, but just kind of reflect on white supremacy basically within ourselves.
Yeah, I would agree with all of Isolt's points there. I would say a good check, if you are afraid that you may be cultural appropriating either clothing or I don't know, something you put on or something you do. If you think that it might be appropriation, it probably is. So just leave it alone.
I think that's a good point. It's kind of like that thing of like, is that racist to say that? It's like, well, if you're double checking, it probably is.
Yeah, if you have to ask, probably just don't do it.
But I think, as we said, you know, this entire conversation is very fluid, and, you know, there is no consensus. I think, you know, I don't speak for all white people. I don't think you girls are speaking for all people who look like yourselves. You know, like, I think it's definitely a movement, which makes it so, you know, so interesting, but also so confusing. You know, but it's good to be having those conversations.
Before I leave, I would love to answer this question, the second question here, which Boston Paul says, are you guys saying that if someone was contributing, e.g. to the Black community via charity or donations, then it is okay to emulate Black culture since they have acknowledged the struggle? I think that maybe this had to do with my opinion parts of it, where I was saying that I had brought my Kenyan clothing and, you know, I wanted to share it. I think that, again, specific examples are very, very important because in your example here, you say, if you're giving to the Black community via charity or donations, then is it okay to emulate Black culture? I don't think that the two connect. If you are supporting Black businesses or being charitable to Black communities by going maybe on a service trip or something like this, if you are aiding in development in Black communities or in majority Black states, this doesn't give you any ownership over that culture. But what this does is that it puts you in more situations, I would assume, where you can share within the context of this culture, the culture itself. And I think sharing is the main goal, is the main word there, because I believe that a Black person would need to be present and inviting you into, I guess, like whatever environment in which you are celebrating and you're sharing their culture. And once you leave this environment, you no longer have an attachment or a connection to it.
Yeah, and I think like the way you put it, like it's not as if, you know, you have a card or a pass or something, and like on that pass maybe you top it up every time you like donate to like a charity, you top it up every time you stop like a racist incident on the tube, you top it up when you share like an anti-racist post on Facebook, and so you get a number of points, and then with that card you can then, you know, dispense and be like, oh, I can go buy a dashiki with that card now, you know, I can go buy a bindi, like, you know. You know, I think like I guess you have to ask, what's the reason for emulating like this culture in a sense? And yeah, I just think, yeah, that's what I think. That's
All right,
what I say on that.
Thank you, Isolt and Lisa, for
Thank you, Chelsea, for joining us.
Thank you so much. For anyone who is interested in learning about Coils & Co. and the natural hair tutorials that we have both on YouTube and Instagram, I'm going to just put our information in.
Oh, I just did.
Oh yes, Isolt has just put our handlebar for our Instagram in the chat, so you can go have a look there. Thank you all for participating. The debate will continue without me. I just need to leave now. And I will see you all next week.
Hi, baby.
All right.
So we have another question or another comment. I agree with what you were saying about capitalism. Fuck capitalism. So do you think Black people who are actively politically and empowering many at this time throughout their life shouldn't enter the political system at the moment, BMPs, etc.? Then if they do join politics, they may be tokenized and used in BAME statistics due to the way of things, even though it is not the job of Black people to avoid this. It is the white person to stop tokenizing, etc. Is there still room for Black people to take up the opportunities but resist from within? Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. I saw a post the other day, and I think I shared it to my Instagram. It was a post by this like Black African-American female director called Shatovia, who's really dope if you're interested in film. Like she gets really, okay, this is out of context, but she gets like old film reels and like just physically draws over like each you know, frame. But anyway, basically she wrote a post saying how Black people, for example, getting in the top of like a company or something like that is not real. I mean, I guess we can say, oh, you know, it's good, but at the same time, that's within a capitalist system. And even when Black people get into those positions, there's still like such oppression beneath that. And so, you know, for example, Bell Hooks, who I talked about earlier, in her book, like Ain't I a Woman, she talks about how we can't, or in that specific book, she talks about how you can't be a feminist, for example, without being an anti-racist, without being an anti-capitalist, without acknowledging how everything is intertwined. And so in that sense, I think Black people can get, maybe they can move up like a little bit within this capitalist structure. Yeah, possibly, like I do think that, but I honestly don't believe that they will ever be equal to white people, just in the sense that capitalism is literally you know, founded or perpetuated and milestones through slavery and through colonialism. We see the UK as such like a power today, and, you know, America is such a power today because of slavery and because of colonialism. So, I mean, this is just like my personal experience, personal like opinion. And it is, yeah, I would argue, yeah, it is empowering to see, you know, Black people up in those top spaces. And I do think that, you know, we should still keep on that. But like personally, I just feel there's not going to be a complete equality. We'll always be like the servant to the master, unless we literally just take down the whole system. Yeah.
Topple it like the statue of Colts.
Huh?
And topple it like the statue of Colts.
Yes, that's what we gotta do.
So a new question, which is cultural appropriation okay in some? Oh, Fiona's here. But is cultural appropriation in some instance, for example, a white person growing up in Jamaica adopting Jamaican culture, is this still even cultural appropriation? I think that's a very good question. I actually have a white cousin who speaks with a very strong Jamaican accent, and when I first met him, I mean, we're Irish, so we have like a million cousins, but when I first met him, I was so surprised. I was just like, what? You're not slurring your, so it is a bit odd. Lisa, would you like to answer?
Yeah, like when I was studying in France with Isolde and Chelsea, why I did this course called like the African diaspora, and it talked about obviously just elements of the African diaspora. And I remember in one lesson we were looking at like Jamaican culture as a culture of resistance, and our teacher mentioned a scholar, a white Jamaican scholar, who calls herself like part of like the Rastafari culture, and obviously, you know, identifying with that. I can't go as far as to explain in detail about this this scholar and her works, because I haven't actually read them. I only know like, you know, the summary of it. But basically she argues that, you know, that's part, she grew up in that, she understands, and she's not or she tries to be anti-racist and stuff, but she accepts, you know, for example, Rastafari, she accepts that she is like trying to abolish this white supremacist structure as well. She's under no illusion that she's on the same level as Black people. She completely understands that. But in terms of if a white person adopts Jamaican culture, I don't know. We have a Jamaican in here. Maybe you want to write in the comments like what you think, Alex, if you want to write something, because maybe you can speak about this more than I can. I would just be chatting out of my head. But yeah, that's what I have to say on that, which isn't so.
The thing to bring it back to is perhaps just the fact also that even if you've grown up, like say we're going to take your example even further, say if it was a reverse blindside, and if you were a white person adopted by a Black family, for example, in a Jamaican context. The thing is, the whole point of white supremacy and racism is that it's all about how other people see you. And it's really about not who you are, how you look, essentially. And so I think even if you were a white person who'd grown up in a Black family, I think in a lot of contexts of your life, you would probably be more likely to experience white privilege more than you type of discrimination just based off the color of your skin. And then, of course, if somebody heard you speak and things like that, maybe that would change. But which just goes to show the absurdity of the entire concept of race. But I do think, I mean, I'm not Jamaican. I've never been to Jamaica, but I'm just presuming that I see whiteness as a global issue, and I think it boils down to not even being white, just being white, you know?
Yeah, I think that's definitely important. Like the whole concept of race, like, you know, somebody from Nigeria is not the same as somebody from South Africa, but we just, you know, boil everybody together. You know, this is Black, this is white. But cultural appropriation, because race was created during slavery and colonialism. It means that just having white skin on a global structure, as Isolde says, gives you privileges. So I don't know, but if you're a white person in Jamaica, you do have Jamaican culture. I guess there's a difference. I guess in your question, like, obviously you're gonna be Jamaican, you're gonna be of the Jamaican culture. I guess there's a difference in like Black Jamaican culture and white Jamaican culture. So obviously as a white person, like, you're Jamaican, like that's your nationality. Nobody can take that away from you. You've brought up whatever culture you've been brought up with, that's legitimately yours. I guess in that situation, if the white person I don't know, it depends. This is the thing, it's just so great. It depends on a lot of things. Like, did they grow up around like Black people? Are they just a lone white person trying to speak like a Black person and trying to, you know, adopt Rastafari but not having, or whilst being segregated from the Black community? Or are they, you know, did they grow up alongside it? I don't know, it's just such, this is what we've been saying, it's just such like a grey area. I don't have the answer to that, unless anyone wants to shed some insight, shed some light. Oh, so Alex is Jamaican. She's just put on the chat.
So I know a lot of people that are of different races but are Jamaican, and they act and talk like any Jamaican. In Jamaica, our motto, oh yeah, that's the national motto, yeah. Our motto is out of many, one people, yeah. So we don't care too much about the race, but the fact that you were born and raised here. So I don't think it's cultural appropriation if you were born and raised in this country. That's interesting. And also, we just had another point by Harvey, who says, even, he said it a little bit earlier, so maybe we passed the moment, but I'm still going to read it out. Even if a Black bourgeois was able to properly develop, I suppose the current system would allow for racism against working class Black people as to benefit the ruling class. Oh, this must have been in reference to the question about Black MPs, I think. Example, the anti-union apps I developed by Facebook I mentioned last seminar. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Does anyone want to raise any other points? If not, perhaps we can conclude, unless anyone has any burning desires to say something. Okay, Boston.
One. A burning desire. Okay.
Okay, we'll be patient. Don't worry. Anyone want to share their experience, like what they think cultural appropriation is? Because obviously, as we've said, it's grey. Like, so if anyone else wants to, any other like person of color wants to shed some light on what they believe it is, then please feel free to do so in the chat or on.
I do want to share something actually. So I don't know, I can't remember who was making the point. I think it might have been Chelsea, but it was in relation to blackface, and I just wanted to share, like, recently I read this book, and Lisa, you'll know about this because we studied journalism together, but it's called Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin, and it's like, John Howard Griffin is an investigative journalist, and he basically goes undercover in the Deep South to look at, like, conditions. So he disguises himself as a Black man, as he calls himself a Negro, and he goes undercover and, you know, to discover the conditions and that kind of thing. And I don't know, cause the book, it's really conflicting because, like, I think with what Chelsea was saying and what Isolde is saying, like, it is blackface, but at the same time, like, I found it so, like, interesting. Do you get what I mean? Like, it was kind of like the first time where a Black man had, I don't know, gone undercover, where a white man had gone undercover as a Black man. And I thought it was like the closest way that a white person could ever possibly get to understanding the experience of Black people. And I'm saying this as like a half white, half Black, you know, woman. So, yeah, I don't know, like I recommend that book to everybody. I just wanted to like share that, but I don't know, it was really conflicting because at the same time, like a part of me felt like he was exploiting the African American experience, like, you know, he was using blackface, but like as I was reading it, I was just thinking like, this is as close as a white person will ever get to understanding what it's like to be Black. Like, so I don't know, it was it was really interesting reading for me, and I just wanted to throw it out there that I think people should definitely like pick up the book and read it, because it definitely does give like a different insight and perspective that, you know, yeah. So
Yeah.
Do you mind writing it in the chat so that we can share it?
So it's cool.
Yeah, no, that is like it is an interesting point. It kind of reminds me though, you know, you have these programs on, well, I know they're on UK TV, I'm sure they're about elsewhere, of like rich people like spending a week or like a few days with like homeless people, and basically trying to see what it's like to be homeless. And I guess my argument would be, why can't you like just listen to people? Like, people have just been telling you for hundreds of years, but you don't believe them. You need to go and feel, or like to understand what it feels like. And I get it, and like, you know, it's a valid point, that, but I just think where this whole thing is, because, you know, right now there's been, you know, a massive wave of anti-racism is in the mainstream, but part of me is just like, you know, we've been talking about this for so long. Black people have been talking about this for hundreds of years. Like, can you not just listen to us? Like, are we not credible? Is a white person like credible when he experiences it and tells all his like white cronies that, you know, it's true? You know,
I think with that book it was more of a thing because it was published in 1960. So the argument like John Howard Griffin kind of gave for it was that he was speaking at a time when people were not listening to Black people, and when, you know, white people had to say something because it was only white people who were being listened to in society. And he kind of, like you said, you know, he said his book would not be really relevant today where Black voices are being heard, but it is really fascinating reading, like even me as like a woman of color, like, you know, because like, I don't know, it's just like, it's really fascinating, like, because he was white, but he lived even artificially like the life of a Black man. So I don't know, I kind of try and recommend it to every white person that I speak to about race, because I just think this is like the closest, like from your perspective, from the way you see the world, that you will come to, you know, to seeing what it's like. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's a really powerful book, and like, but yeah, no, I completely get your point, but I think it is like a book of its time, where it was written kind of as a cry to, like, you know, white racists in the deep South who are like, you know, refusing to see the racism and to see, you know, the problems of their actions and what was going on and that kind of thing. But
I think, yeah, I totally see what you mean. And I think the example that I brought up originally was the German guy who did that. And the thing is, yeah, I was actually going to ask you, when was that book written, because it makes sense that it's written in the 60s. But even in Germany 10 years ago, I'm presuming the reason that they didn't use a Black person to do that experiment was because only a white person would be listened to. And so I think the point that you're raising here is still, at the end of the day, actually still valid, especially in the US South. I don't think people will listen. I mean, which is kind of in part why Lisa and I wrote this page together. It's because white people tend to listen to white people who look like them. They don't want to hear. I think that's why white people, we need to show up in this anti-racist struggle, because it sucks and it shouldn't be that way, but we are listened to, and so we really need to use that privilege in a constructive way. And I think you're right. This is one, for those people, it perhaps gave them a window of vision into what abuse you face when you're Black, but also, yeah, I think
it was just interesting for me because during everything that's been going on, like I've tried to have conversations with, you know, with white friends and explain what it's like, but like there's always been that point you reach where you're like, you will never kind of see it in the same way as me because you're not the same color as me, like you will never understand exactly where I'm coming from. So like then I'm thinking of a particular conversation I had with a friend of mine, but then right after that I read this book and I was like I don't know, I feel like it's something that I kind of want to, like, I don't know, throw at friends who will never be able to see it from my perspective. But if it's somebody in their skin, do you go, I mean, like, who's lived their life experiences, they might be able to, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like understand it in a way that you can understand my experience.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's really messed up what I'm about to say, but I think white people, this is the problem, is not white people, the problem is whiteness, but I think white people are taught to not feel empathy for non-white people. We're taught to feel empathy for ourselves and for our social group, and that's it. And I think this goes really hand in hand in topics that we've covered in other seminars, with Black women being expected to be able to endure more pain. And I think all of this is really interrelated, you know, not listening to Black people and disregarding their experience is very much part of our inability, our consistent inability to empathize. And the thing, we can't even empathize, but we don't even sympathize. This is the thing, like, I will never understand the experience of a Black person, but I can try to, you know, listen and understand. And even though I will never fully be Black, and so will never experience Blackness, but or experience Blackness in the white gaze, more to the point, but yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just wanted to throw that book out there, you know, so people might pick it up and, you know, read it, because it is a great read, to be fair, like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah.
We have another question. Does accusing someone of cultural appropriation slyly enforce / secure stereotypes? For example, if I'm not mistaken, the example given earlier with Iggy appropriating Black culture by rapping, surely that enforces the stereotype that Black people rap. I mean, okay, so on that example, maybe I didn't lay it out so clearly. Like, for example, even me, I like listen to some white rappers and all of that. But it's more of the sense, like, it's not, we're not saying, or like personally, again, I'm going to speak from a personal standpoint, like, I'm not saying that white people can't rap. I'm saying if you're actively making bills, making like dollars, like hundreds and hundreds, like literal stacks of money off a culture, you know, if we want to talk about rap, if we want to talk about the origins of rap, you know, I talked about the origins of reggae. If we want to talk about the origins of rap, it was born again as a form of resistance, a form of rebellion amongst, you know, Black youths within, like, you know, the ghettos, to try and voice their experiences, to try and voice, you know, what's happening within, you know, their communities. And so we can't, and so when a white person comes and they make so much money and don't recognize, don't even, I don't know, support, maybe, I'm just gonna say this, I don't have a full breakdown of Iggy Azalea's like career and everything, but I guess Azealia Banks was like infused and was vexed because she felt that Iggy Azalea was not like showing the culture respect, was not showing the root respect. She was just like, okay, oh, I'm here as a white woman, and you know, I've created this amazing thing called rap. She wasn't paying it due respect, especially like even relating to kind of the example that Chelsea gave about like Marc Jacobs, when he had a runway of like people wearing faux dreadlocks, and how he said that that was, you know, reminiscent of white culture. You know, he's not paying respect. So it's not about saying that like white people can't rap, because obviously personally I don't agree with that. Like, I think white people can rap. White people can be reggae DJs, like jungle drum and bass DJs, but whilst you do that, you need to acknowledge where that culture comes from, and you need to pay respects, and you need to build up, because you have privilege. So you need to, you know, get other, you know, Black rappers there, like with you. You need to give a platform to Black DJs, because you have a privilege. And so when you're not doing that, you're just isolating yourself, and you're not even within where the culture like originated.
So somebody, how would one give it due respect? Totally agree with you. I'm just interested. I think that's a very good question. It's something that's very non-tangible sometimes, you know? And I think even more broadly in the anti-racist fight, when we say we need to acknowledge white privilege, we need to acknowledge white privilege, I think a lot of the time it's very abstract.
Yeah, I think obviously I just want to say I'm not a spokesperson for all Black people. You know, like Dizzy Rascal said in his Morgan thing the other day, like, you know, I don't speak, we're not, Black people aren't just the same people, so I can't, obviously I'm not saying that as a criticism, I'm just saying everything that I say is just going to be like my opinion, so don't take it as a marker, a rule book for this discourse. But how would one give it due respect? I mean, so first of all, as I said, like, integrate with the Black community. If you're a lone white person and, you know, you don't have any connections to the Black community and then you want to appropriate their culture, then I think that's problematic. I think you need to be integrated with that community. You know, secondly, educate yourself. I guess the whole reason we do this platform is education, you know, revolution of consciousness, like revolution of the mind, like decolonization. We need to educate ourselves. So I guess at the point where you've educated yourself, and because, you know, it may sound like a long thing to do, you know, researching where Black culture came from and all of this, but realistically, Black people have had to educate themselves on their own culture because it's not accessible in the school curriculum, and Black people have had to face oppression. So I would say, you know, first of all, just take time out to educate, and once you do understand it, then I mean, ultimately, everybody is their own person, and everyone has free will. So at that point, you know, if you decide then through your education that you wanna, like through your education, if you're properly like taking that education on, and then you wanna make a breakthrough as like a reggae artist or whatever, like you need to be aware of the criticisms if you're not like integrated with the Black community, for example. And for example, you need to not get defensive in a sense when Black people call you out. Like obviously, as I said, anyone can do anything that they want. It's just about recognizing, and it's about not speaking over and enforcing your opinions. But also, yeah, as I said earlier, you know, bringing other people up within that culture. So bringing up, as I said, fellow DJs, musicians, artists, like, I don't know, actively being anti-racist, actively, I don't know, getting involved with this, that, the other, using your platform. If you've got a voice, using it. If you have a voice as a white female rapper like Iggy Azalea, you have so much, you have like a massive white following. I'm sure she has a Black following as well, but she has a massive white following. So that is her prime opportunity to, you know, to bring that anti-racist like talk, to educate her whole following. That's how you utilize a platform. And that's, you know, obviously I wouldn't argue if she was doing that with her platform, but again, it's a gray area. What I think is different from what the next person of color thinks.
Yeah. And I think to that a little bit is most people don't have a platform that Iggy Azalea has. And so I think something that us white people need to come to terms with is that if we're trying to be anti-racist, the thing is, we're not going to get credit for that. We shouldn't pat ourselves on the back for that because it's the bare minimum. And, you know, white people, people of color don't owe us any gratitude for that. And what I'm getting at really is the fact that a lot of this work is very much, it's not really that it's lonely, it's more that it's silent and it's with yourself. And a lot of people, they're not gonna know, you know, it's not written on your face that, you know, I've read every single Angela Davis book, like every single Toni Morrison, but like it's not written, you know. So I think a lot of I know it's not tangible at all, but I think it's kind of giving something due, like giving Black struggle or just non-white struggles the due respect that they deserve is just with white people learning about them. I think that is because most of us don't have the like, you know, I totally get that. First of all, I think my position as a like positioning myself here in this whiteness page is totally discussable, and I think it would be interesting to do an entire seminar, not on me, but just on white people doing similar things, taking up this type of space and stuff. But I think, yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, most of it, like, I totally get people who don't choose to like spend a lot of time organizing seminars like we do, things like that. I totally get that you won't do that. So I totally understand also people who don't have platforms. So it means that a lot of this work is very, very personal and almost kind of spiritual, because you're unlearning a lot of this stuff. And I think, I think that's kind of one of the best ways that we can start on a personal level, giving not reparations, but just kind of, learning about where people are coming from, basically, I think.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, obviously earlier I was chatting about revolution and all of that. I would just say, you know, when I say revolution, I don't just solely mean, you know, taking arms against, you know, some power. I mean also, you know, I mean the mind, you know, revolutionizing the mind, because arguably nobody is going to change things if they're still, you can't just give or say to somebody we need to take that down this structure but then not tell them why. You know, people need to be, people's minds, people's consciousness, people's ways of thinking need to be, you know, decolonized and learn in a new way. Yeah.
So we have another question. Oh wait, I'm nodding the whole way through your answers. So true. Thank you. Step out of yourself, thinking about others. Such good advice. Oh, we didn't come up with it ourselves, you know. Lots of people have been saying it for a very long time. So, blah, blah, blah. Can someone?
But also, I just want to say, in case this goes out, I'm not saying that we should go and, you know, take arms against the government. You know, I'm just.
There are places where it's legal, Lisa. There are places where it's legal. Self-defense, you know. Okay, don't sue us.
Yeah.
Okay, so can someone from the same culture appropriate it?
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Can someone from the same culture appropriate it? I guess some people aren't as concerned about the struggle as much as others, even within a single culture, right? Oh yeah, wink, wink, nudge. I didn't see the actual comment yet.
I think, okay, I'll just give my perspective again. Anyone, please feel free to add their perspective. But I think racism, as we've said, like, it's something that's constructed. I've said earlier, you know, of course, Nigerian people are different from, you know, South Africans, are different from Ethiopians. We're all, you know, everyone's different. It's not just black and white. It has no biological basis. We know that race is literally something that was created, as we've talked about many times before, by a white supremacist structure to subordinate and exploit and, you know, capitalize. And so within like, for example, the Black culture, for example, you know, to use Chelsea's example, she bought me a Kenyan, like some Kenyan trousers, and so I myself am like half Zambian, half English. So you know, you could argue I'm not even Kenyan. Like, should I be wearing like something, like I should be wearing something of like Zambian culture, blah blah blah. But I mean, in my perspective, in my opinion, I do think that cultural appropriation is a race thing because of the system that we live in. In another world where we live in a system where literally each nation was kind of against each other, then maybe that's something we talk about. But in this system that we live, black has been grouped together as black, white has been grouped together as white, and, you know, kind of adopting, you know, elements within that black culture, whilst it can like be a wide thing, I think it is resistance, you know. So yeah, I mean, that's just my personal opinion. I do think that because race has been defined as it is, that I would personally say that you can't. However, I would add though, if I, for example, like I went around like I don't know, wearing like, I don't know, I can't think of anything, my mind's gone blank. But if I went around and wore like Ethiopian traditional dress or something, and an Ethiopian like called me out on it, I would listen to them again in that sense, because technically that isn't my culture, but I do think it is more along race lines. And then something also that we did talk about yesterday, like me, Chelsea and Esau, is that you know, appropriate one marginalized culture appropriating another marginalized culture. And obviously like different people have different perspectives on this as well. Like, you know, a Black person appropriating like an Indian person's culture, which, you know, again, that's not my culture. So I can't argue with anybody that is an Indian that's going to tell me that I'm appropriating their culture. But again, it's a conversation to be had, because it's just everyone has different opinions on it.
Yeah, and I really like this conversation because it's such an opportunity to learn. Like, because it's so complicated, we learn so much out of it. So Harvey has said, ways of dividing existed before racism. For example, Romans would treat people differently based on a loose idea of culture, but skin color didn't matter to them. How we are divided depends on the material conditions of the day and the ruling class sees best to divide. I think a very, very good example for this is, which is often used in a problematic way, is the Irish situation. You know, Irish people were a British colony for 800 years, and well, Ireland, sorry, people were not the colony, but Ireland was a British colony for 800 years, and arguably some people still are, arguably, and so yeah, 100%, I think. And even just more broadly, I mean, back in the day, you know, the class systems were so entrenched. Like, you know, the clergy and the rich were, I mean, I think they were like, I can't even remember the number. They were just a ridiculously small portion of the population, and the rest were just serfs and were much, much poorer. And it was definitely divide to rule better, definitely. And yeah. Has always occurred before race. I think just race was created in order to further exploit and to really, really justify that and be able to be Christian and so fundamentally racist at the same time.
Yeah, I think
in Africa there are clear inequalities. I mean, you look at African politics, like it's complicated, you know. So I don't know. I feel like hierarchy. It's about hierarchy. It just happens in a white supremacist system to be a racial one, but hierarchy, I think, has always been it is around, basically.
Yeah, but I think that's a very important part, you know, that you said material conditions of the day. Oh, that we are divided depends on the material conditions of the day. Like, it's just created in this time. Tale, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, what I just wanted to say was, well, what I understand with, like, on this issue, my own understanding is that I guess it's like really subjective. I mean, depending on where you're at, or, you know, the culture. I'm going to speak about my culture, like especially my tribe, like the Bemba tribe, because way back I read some books and some things about our culture. Well, in our culture as Bemba, the Bemba tribe, we actually consider cultural appropriation, something, the thing you referred to as cultural appropriation or whatever, we consider it some kind of like homage or something like that. You know, like when we see somebody from a different country or like a different tribe, maybe emulating certain aspects of our culture, like dressing and, you know, dance, music or whatever. We, way back, our kings and all these chiefs considered that a way of conquering their subjects, their subjects, you know, like other tribes like the Mambwes and the Ngonis were conquered, and they picked up a few things from our tribe, you know, and they were given women to marry so they can raise their kids as Bembas or whatever. So to us, like here in Zambia, it's actually a really big thing. We don't even consider it like a wrong thing to see people from other countries and other parts of the world, you know, like kind of picking up a few things from our culture. It's just how we think. We just want to spread our culture to the rest of the world, you know, because something we take so much pride in. So yeah, that's all I think.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So to give context, my mom's part of the Mambwe tribe, which Tale referenced as the Bembas conquering. But wouldn't the argument be that the Bembas, for example, conquered like my mom's people, like half of my people, and they tried to assimilate? Is that not like the same? Would you not say that's kind of like the same assimilation as white people trying to control people through, like, because they're, okay, in the example you've given, so Bembas are the ones that are trying to dominate other cultures, and then so once they have once they've controlled or taken control of another tribe, then they can put their ideals and their culture on that tribe. So is that then not, again, like a power thing? I'm just picking brains. Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, basically, I think it is. I think that's why it is, but primarily, I think it's just the philosophy behind that is just like spreading the culture because it's such a good thing and people need to emulate it, including white people and like settlers, missionaries picked up a few things from that culture. So
because
I don't know. I don't think,
Okay, so if a person in England, a white person in England who'd never been to Zambia, just, I don't know, went to carnival with a Zambian flag wrapped around their body, what would you think?
Yeah, well, I don't think people, like here in Zambia, people are so different. I mean, you've been here, so you know how people are. They don't, like, we're not really fazed by certain things unless it's like really serious. So we wouldn't take that serious. We'll just take it as, oh, we're winning because we're definitely influencing somebody. It's like what Zambian people care about is like changing people's minds and perspectives. So if somebody feels the need to actually go and carry a Zambian flag when they are not in fact from Zambia, then we're definitely winning at what we intend to impose, you know.
Yeah, naturally, yeah.
I think this is a little bit comparable to Chelsea's example when she was talking about giving us Kenyan articles of clothing. You know, it's about pride and sharing it. I think maybe it's comparable.
Exactly. And I think that's what's going to make the world a better place, you know, because I feel like our ancestors were like really wise people, and they studied like philosophy, and like they really took it as an important thing in their society, in our community, to like know, to understand, you know, like what will make the world a better place and what brings people closer together. And it's sharing, you know, taking different parts of things from each and every culture and making it, meshing it and turning it into one beautiful thing. That's what we believe in. And that's why, like, even just Zambia itself is like one of the, if not the most peaceful country in the world because of that, just that value we uphold, you know.
Yeah, I feel you.
Do you think that basically this entire conversation is very, it's a question, I don't know. Do you think it's a very Western-centric conversation? Because I mean, obviously me and Lisa are talking from a European perspective because that's what we know. But do you think this conversation is even a conversation in, I don't know, in, like, obviously in North America it is too, but like, I don't know. Yeah, what do you guys think?
In Africa? Well, I mean, I feel like it is, like, it is a conversation everywhere in a way, you know? Because, I mean, when it comes to like things like having to capitalize or benefit from a culture that isn't yours, I mean, that's an issue. But like having, like, emulating and one feeling the need to belong to something you think is really amazing, or I mean, I don't know. I think I lost my train of thought, but I think it is a conversation in a way, to some extent, but like, yeah, I guess to some extent, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a very context-specific conversation, perhaps. Like, it's not
Yeah.
all, is what I'm trying to say. We just have sorry, would you like to say?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm not Black, clearly, but I am a Palestinian woman of color. And so on the topic of cultural appropriation, if this has been Western-centric, and kind of, I guess, my experience as a person who constantly has to deal with the idea of cultural appropriation, whether it comes to music or food or even our resistance clothing, I think the center of the entire issue when it comes to appropriating is the power structure. So on the topic of like minority groups taking from each other versus a white population appropriating something from a minority group, I think the main issue is the power structure. When it's a society that is benefiting off of something that they do not understand, purely for economic reasons, they do not give homage to, they don't do any of that kind of stuff, it becomes appropriation. But as a Palestinian, when I see people of color, or even white people, for example, wearing the kofiyeh, and I know that they're like wearing it respectfully, you know, versus a person who's wearing it in some funky tie-dye colors at Coachella, that, you know what I mean? There's a difference there. You know, there's this Danish brand recently that's come under fire because she's taken the kofiyeh print and she's made little cute sundresses with it without giving any homage at all, you know, pretending like it's her own print, while this is the resistance print that we wore when we were fighting for our freedom for the past 70 years. And so I think it really relies on who is like the appropriating needs to come from a place of privilege for it to be considered appropriating, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or like for like where we come from.
That was very, very well said.
Yeah, I do agree. It's definitely a power thing. It's 100% a power thing. Hello? Okay, sorry, I think you cut out a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
No stress. Somebody wrote, if someone is ignorant to the fact that they are culturally appropriating, is it okay?
I think it depends on how you react once you're told. You know, like, this is going to be a big part of the conversation. I'm not sure about that.
Nadine, do you wanna shed any light? You seem like you have a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, so I think like my first instance when I come across someone, again, so this is my personal experience, but I think I speak for at least a healthy minority of Palestinians that come across this international community that appropriates and or shows, you know, homage or whatever. If the ignorance is one that is by mistake or coincidental, or one that is understandable, as in like you haven't come across, you wouldn't know, etc., then it's okay because it's accepted that it's like, oh, you'll be called out or you'll be told and then you won't do it again. But if it's something that you do, you know, if it's something that there is a culture around from where you're from, you know, if it's totally normal for you to not only dress in traditional African clothing, but traditional Indian clothing, traditional Palestinian clothing, just because you think it's cool, then like that's a bigger issue. It's not like one simple little mistake or something like that. And I think it's more about, like I said, the privilege. I think if the ignorance come from, you wouldn't know, you haven't come across this information, you don't know these cultures, you haven't seen a person of color, you come from somewhere where this isn't a thing, that's one thing. But if you are exposed, then there's a certain, I think, like social accountability to like basic human decency in that regard.
I completely agree. And I would just add onto that, like, obviously, as you said, you can't blame somebody for not knowing something, like how can they know? But at the same time,
Are you okay?
I don't know, my mom just walked into my room and chucked a baguette at me. Anyway, sorry. At the same time, now I've just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, at the same time, I guess what we're trying to do here, and what the whole point of, you know, this platform is, and is to educate people. And, you know, it is the bare minimum to know these things. Like, I think people have a duty and have a responsibility to learn about Black culture, learn about brown culture, learn about minority culture, because, you know, we have to go to school every day. Well, when we went to school, we had to go to school every day and learn about white culture. So I just, honestly, personally, I just think it's the least you can do. We have the internet, you know, we have so many amazing people spreading this information. Like, you can get it for free a lot of the time. Like, you know, it is just, you know, spending a little bit of time to educate yourself. But, you know, Black people, brown people, people of color have to go through oppression. So the least you can do is educate yourself on what cultural appropriation is, especially because it's such a buzzword at the moment. So, you know, if you're in this society, I can't believe that you haven't heard of, like, or like anybody hasn't heard of cultural appropriation. But maybe there are some people that haven't.
Yeah.
And they
You're 100% right. I wanted to say exactly that. The fact that we live in an era of internet, and that there is a certain, if you have Instagram, which you probably do, then diversify your feed and, you know, learn. Like, that is a bit, I think social media can be a very useful tool in our personal journey of learning. And I think it's really fine to, like, I think we're here to learn. I think it's okay to make mistakes, you know? And part of that is perhaps culturally appropriating, getting dreadlocks and then realizing that maybe you shouldn't, and cutting them off, you know, like this. I think it's okay to make those mistakes, but I think exactly as Lisa said, I think there is also an accountability to be had, especially when we're in this context, the one we're talking about, which is one of whiteness and white supremacy. I think white people really have to, there is no I'm not racist, there is only I am actively anti-racist, and part of that is to actively look, you know, like try to learn the most possible, and so yeah, you can only stay ignorant for so long. Ignorance at some point. What's that sentence that Jane Elliott always has written on her t-shirts? Ignorance is a commitment to, no, racism is a commitment to ignorance, or something like that. But yeah, I think we can only be ignorant for so long.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody got any other points?
Yeah.
Okay, Boston Paul is out here with the questions.
You mentioned, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. You mentioned about how cultural appropriation depends on the power dynamic. But what about the instance where, like, a white chef is cooking Chinese food for a living?
So once we were having dinner with Chelsea, and her and our friend Kanya had a massive argument about exactly this. So what were you gonna say, Lisa? It was literally
I was actually gonna say that as well. We've discussed this whole thing, but I think, you know, a lot of, throughout the seminar, we've been talking about, you know, capitalizing and literally gaining economically off somebody else's culture. You know, we know, for example, in the UK, there's so many Chinese, like, restaurants. You don't need to make another one as a white person, and then literally getting money from a culture. Especially, like, this kind of reminds me of Jamie Oliver's jerk rice fiasco, where basically he created this jerk rice, but just to say jerk rice isn't even like a thing. It's not a thing. And the way that he made it was just with, like, loads of these wild, like, random flavors that aren't even I think even maybe pomegranate or something. I don't know. Basically, it was a whole thing. It was a whole scandal because he made this, like, jerk rice, which doesn't actually exist, and then said that, and then just, like, made it incorrectly to, like, what actual, like, Jamaicans eat and what actual jerk seasoning is. And basically this jerk rice entered, like, all of the mainstream, like, stores, and people were coming up and saying, you know, this guy is literally making money off our culture, and two, he's doing it incorrectly. That's not even the recipe. So one, it's just irresponsible because that you're not even making it properly. But you know, it's a power thing, and I don't think there's so many Jamaican chefs out there. There's so many Chinese chefs out there. There's so many Indian chefs out there that can make their own cuisine, and you know, there's loads of businesses that are doing that. So why does a white person need to go and make money off a Black culture? You know, it's different, because I know now people might say, you know, go to restaurants in I know the UK where we eat I don't know, French cuisine or something, but obviously that's just like white people, you know, appropriating white culture, which is a different thing. There's not the same power there.
Comes in there.
Huh?
I don't think appropriation even comes in. If there's a French restaurant in Brighton or London, I don't even think it comes in there.
Yeah, no, I feel you. So I just feel like if you're making money off another person's culture, say you've got an all-white staff team, that's problematic. You know, you need to probably not do that. But again, it's a great area. You know, what about if you've lived in China your whole life or whatever, and then you want to come to I don't know, like, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is why the girls tried to have very...
Well, I think since the question was phrased about, go ahead.
No, don't worry. I was just going to say that these are why we have very specific examples, because it's so, there's no one answer fits all to any of these questions, really.
Yeah, what I was going to say was since the question was phrased in the question of like, since we spoke about power dynamics, what about this? I think power dynamics still kind of play into the scenario that's been played out, which is a white person opening a Chinese restaurant, especially, I guess, when you think about the context of the US. Most immigrants, when they came here, coming for refuge, asylum, new life, opportunity, whatever, a lot of those first wave opened authentic restaurants. It's how they worked, it's how they fed their kids, it's how they did those things. And so for a white person who, and again, it's more to note that these people usually didn't know English. They usually didn't know how to make pizza. They don't know how to make, you know, all hot dogs and burgers and all this other crap when they came here, you know? And so it's like, when this is a form of literal like life and struggle that is so so much so like, at least in the US, like the immigrant community, for a white person to then go and open a restaurant, especially if you talk about like one that even like does it incorrectly, that's a different story. But like, it's just without, again, recognizing that they have the other options, you know, that's where the power dynamic comes in, that they don't, this isn't their only source of getting by. Like, if they didn't open their restaurant, their kids weren't gonna starve, because they know to do something else. They know to speak that language. They can make pizza, they can make burgers, and they can do all the other stuff. And so I think in that context, specifically, probably maybe only in the US to that degree, it's very much like that, I think.
Yeah,
like in the power dynamic sense.
Yeah, I would agree. And like similarly, I mean, as well in a UK context, you know, Chinese people came here and did the same thing to, you know, just make some income. And so, yeah, I would agree. It's just inappropriate in terms of the power at play.
Yeah, I think definitely, even in a UK context, like Indian people, all these Indian people, it would be really, like, I would consider it really, really odd if I saw a white man running an Indian themed restaurant or like serving Indian food. I'd just be kind of like, that's really odd.
Yeah. And even humor, would you go to something that wasn't authentically, you know, of that culture?
Even, sorry, you cut off. What did you say?
I said, even as a consumer, would you go to, when there's so many authentic places, as a consumer, would you go and pick an unauthentic, you know, restaurant?
If depends if you know, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, comments, questions.
I'm learning a lot. I hope everybody's learning too.
Oh, this is the last one, I think.
So, do you guys think cultural appropriation is one of the main factors or one of the main reasons why racism is still like very much existent?
I mean, okay, no, you go, babes. I've been chatting a lot.
I was just going to say, personally, I think it's a symptom of it rather than, the root cause.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It is. Yeah, it's yeah. I would say the exact same thing.
I think it's
obviously
by white supremacy. It's enabled by white supremacy, but I'm not sure that it's cultural appropriation is only a symptom of a system with such pronounced unequal power dynamics on racial base,
Yeah, like obviously it's important to discuss. Wait, sorry, Nadine, you go.
I was gonna say I agree that it's a symptom, but I also think that it could be a tool. I also think that cultural appropriation is weaponized in the name of racism, so to speak, in the name of subjugating another culture, in the name of taking, in the name of doing all those very colonialist, white, historical things. You know?
And actually, go ahead.
No, that was it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because actually that brings up something in my mind, which is it's also used against anti-racists, because often I think when cultural appropriation is brought up, I think people tend to kind of brush it to the side and be like, oh, that's a fake problem, you're inventing an issue, which I think is really interesting and kind of like feeds off what you're saying, because it's used as a tool both to perpetuate racism and also to gaslight people and to minimize, kind of be like, oh, but that's not a real issue. Do you guys see what I mean?
Yeah. And I think as well, like, relating back to what I said earlier, like literally exploiting somebody like for economic gain, exploiting their culture. That's literally that was what slavery was, just exploiting people for economic gain. And so it's literally, as I said earlier, if we take culture to be a natural resource, this is just like colonialism. It's just part of the wide problem of racism, and we all need to like dismantle it and actively dismantle it, because otherwise you're complicit.
So I mean, we take a lot from white culture as well, like be like clothing, fashion, like music and things like that, like a lot of things, and we do benefit from it. We didn't invent cakes, but we make cake, bake, and we make money off it. So I guess it's like some kind of exchange in a way, you know what I mean? That's how I would see it personally.
Unfortunately, you missed the beginning, but Chelsea spoke about this.
Oh yeah, I was real late.
Yeah, no, don't worry. But yeah, she spoke about that, and she kind of made a case of why it doesn't work the other way around. In the same way as there's no such thing really as anti-white racism, she was saying, again, the conversation comes back to who is dominant really. And so I think, actually, we were talking about this, and my friend Evan kept saying last week when we were talking about statues, he kept saying, what the hell is British culture? Tea is not British, curry is not British. None of these staples of British culture are actually British. And so, I think what comes into, for example, scones or cakes or whatever, it's like, well, I don't think the British are losing anything with non-British people eating like McVitie.
So if we keep on calling people out on cultural appropriation and things like that, when we do keep on taking from other cultures, doesn't that kind of stress the fact that we will stay minorities? What's going to make us, what's going to lead us from?
Yeah, I would say, oh, sorry, Nadine.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to reinforce the whole power of it all. because perhaps, you know, somebody in Zambia can go and, I don't know, make some Western like clothing, whatever, and sell it, and then technically, yeah, they're making money by selling that. But on a grand scale, like on a systematic scale, even within Africa itself, like white people like colonize it, and still, you know, it's colonialism even over. Like white people are still exploiting like black people. They're literally taking over businesses, you know, within Zambia, within the Copperbelt region. You know, we know of that. And so on a systematic level, again, if a black person is taking on that white culture, that white culture is dominant. That white culture has the power. That white culture has been assimilating and forcing people around the world to look like them, to act like them, to do everything that they do, to, you know, be civilized, aka like be like of a white European nature. And so this whole systematic like bleaching, whitewashing, cultural annihilation comes down to the point that if a black person, like, then, you know, this is what Chelsea was saying earlier, you know, if a black person then, for example, wears weave, you know, a lot of people chat about black girls wearing weave, or black people bleaching their skin, but that's because they have been told to by, you know, the dominant structure. They've been told that you're ugly with dark skin, you're ugly with your kinky hair, you need to sort that out, you need to change that. And because of this perpetual condemnation of black culture, then, you know, black people are, you know, arguably taken into, or they're arguably like adopt that, because that is normality. That's the normal culture. The normal culture is the white supremacist culture. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
And I would just add to that briefly that for example, in the case of black women wearing weaves versus what Chelsea was and yourself were talking about earlier with black hair being seen as unprofessional, unkempt, etc., all those that entire rhetoric that we see. Also, I think your life is going to be easier if you buy into that whiteness. If you choose to get a weave and have straighter hair, like, chances are it will be easier. I think it's, maybe I'm stretching it, but I think it's a little bit comparable to when women choose to get plastic surgery, for example. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, but the reason I'm saying that is because, like, it's a system which is built to, it's not built for you. It's not built for you to succeed. So when you choose to comply with the system in order to have more of a chance of succeeding, like, do you see what I mean? Like, what I'm kind of trying to get at? Like, yeah.
I think, yeah, you're pointing out like a, you know, like a flaw in the system, like a sad reality that people of color have to deal with, which is like, you know, don't wear your hair naturally. With like people like Islam, a lot of women in Western countries will not wear their hijab in public, will feel like they can't be outwardly Muslim, will feel like they can't be outwardly culturally whatever. I think it's all about sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, nope, it's gone.
Thing about, like, I was getting at, like, people complying with the system in order to.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's a sad reality, but I think it's dangerous to almost accept it as a reality, because I think there's a lot of, like, the phrase, you know, one that like I grew up with is existence is resistance. Being unapologetically you, culturally and personally and everything, is part of what you do on a personal level to push your own almost like validation forward. And I think to say that you might be a little have better chance, like, we know you'd have better chance if you conformed and if you dressed like a white person, if you talked like a white person and all those other things. But I think it's dangerous to almost paint that in a positive light, because I think it's something that people of color need to fight the urge to do, because it's easier. You know, it's easier than being yourself in a society that like constantly doesn't want you to be.
So Boston Paul has his last question, or their last question, which is, silly question, does no cultural appropriation equal cultural exchange? And then somebody asked, I don't know how to pronounce that, Bronwyn, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry. Whitewashing has a lot to answer for, yeah. So yeah, does no cultural appropriation equal no cultural exchange? I think that goes back to what, actually, Lisa, you said something about that earlier. Do you want to reiterate it? It was you, right? It wasn't.
Yeah, so I talked about the definition of cross-cultural fertilization and how, you know, if we think about nice, like, harmonious cultural exchange, we think about something that's like mutually beneficial to both parties. But obviously, obviously that's amazing, and we'd love to be in a world where we can all, cross cultures and fertilize each other's cultures and all of that. But the thing is, we live in a world which is white supremacist, and so within that world, there will never be an equal exchange between a white culture and a black culture. That will never happen because we live in this world. And so, yeah, I guess cultural exchange, we have been exchanging cultures for time, like since the beginning of time, but racism as we know it, like, has been created, like, at the beginning of the 1600s onwards. And so within this system, as Harvey said earlier, like, we have to, something about, like, this is our current system at the moment, and so within this system, no, I don't think there can be like cultural exchange,
And
which
actually,
is
I have
harmonious.
Just came to my mind, which was one that a teacher, so a teacher told me about this example, and I don't actually remember the name of the cheese that I'm going to talk about, but anyway, so back in the day, like maybe to be honest, I can't, like maybe between the year 1200 and the year 1550, somewhere between, I'm really not sure of the timeline of this, but there was a lot of invasions between Western Europe and just generally Europe and North Africa. There was wars between Islam and Christianity, and we all invaded each other and disinvaded each other and blah blah blah. That's just how our world was. But people migrate. That's how things work, And anyway, that one teacher was pointed out to us that at the bottom of the Pyrenees, which is like this mountain range in France, there is a very famous cheese which is like revered as like this French, like super French, you cannot be more French type cheese. And it was actually it's a goat's cheese, and she was explaining to us that the goats, like there were no goats in France back in the day, and it was Arab people, what we now call Arab people, what were then called Moors, brought over, like North African Arabs basically, brought over goats and multiple other animals while they were invading the south of France. And so she was just saying, this is highly ironic because probably that before race was constructed as I'm not sure exactly how it was perceived, like how much people, like what people thought of that cheese, but she was just pointing out to the irony of the fact that this came from, to some extent, a cultural exchange, which is just one of circumstance of migration patterns. But now it's kind of like, I don't know if, I don't think anybody has ever calling that cheese a French cheese cultural appropriation. However, we could kind of think about how something which is, how in the context of white supremacy that could be seen as cultural appropriation, because it's because we're talking from within a white supremacist system, it's about, it's kind of, it all boils down to whatever is white is better, even when it's actually not white at all,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think also, obviously, people, when we're like, obviously we're talking about cheese, like most people are not going to see like it's hard to see the racial aspects of cheese, but like I just think it's an interesting example to
Also, I wanted to ask Tale, were you kind of satisfied in the response. Obviously, you know, I was just interested to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all my questions are just, I'm just here to learn. So yeah, I'm pretty much satisfied with what I'm, getting, and the information I'm picking from the whole conversation. Yeah, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, I hope we're not making this like, we're the dictators of knowledge, because, everyone has, experiences and stuff and all of that. So I just want to make a note that we're all learning from each other. I think that's a point. And I don't think, we can tell somebody else about the experiences that they had. I think this is more, I think the point of this, or like, and from my understanding, is that this should be like the topic of anti-racism. Obviously, like, white people should go out and educate themselves, but at the same time, it should be an open conversation. Like, there's never a finite answer. And I hope that everyone's learning from each other. We're learning from you, Tale, like, everybody's learning from everybody.
Questions and gave us lots of thoughts. Thank you for sharing, all of you. So yeah, should we end it here? Does anybody have any other last thoughts or things to share?
I mean, I guess we'll be here all night. To be fair, I'm not doing anything.
How's your baguette tasting?
Oh no, I'm eating grapes.
Oh.
Okay, so he says, last one, promise. Do you think that the fact that we are in an Instagram, Twitter, Facebook age has accelerated / amplified the importance of the issue of cultural appropriating, since a single person's act of appropriate can reach millions quickly? Yeah, I would definitely 100% say so, especially we have such instant platforms. For example, Kim Kardashian will post her in braids, and it's reaching such mass audiences, so it enables us to talk about this. I would even argue that this discussion of racism in general is facilitated by, well, thanks for joining, Harvey. Oh, he's left already. But so I would say just the whole discussion on racism is facilitated a lot by social media, for example. I mean, in this age, we can now, for example, I grew up in a very white area. As I said, I think I'm pretty sure I was the only Black person in my year at school, and like, people from here, because they just see other white people, so they don't understand, like, Black culture or Black history and all of this. And so I think what the internet has done has allowed us to just go online, or on social media, just go online and see how other people are living, and educating ourselves, and at the same time calling people out who are in this bubble, where this bubble of ignorance. I think it can be healthy in that sense, as a way for everybody across the globe to just exchange ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also what social media has done is that it's a tool for educating people about white supremacy. And in my experience of social media is that Black and brown voices are really, really can really be amplified should you choose to diversify your feed, which I invite my white peers to do, because through this we can, like, I mean, it's messed up to some extent, but it's actually like a lot of labor for free. And I mentioned earlier, I was like, I'm very grateful to all, especially the Black women who put this work out there of reflection on whiteness and things like that, because I mean, how else would people like such as myself learn this stuff? We need to hear it from the horse's mouth, you know? So it's so I think the issue of cultural appropriation and the issue of statues is actually being spoken about because we have no other choice than to listen to Black and brown voices, which have systematically and systemically been silenced in the past. And now we don't like it, but we hear them, and we have no choice but to hear them. And I think that's a good thing.
I think that's true, but I think there's still a lot to say for the fact that but in most Western places, or Western modeled like places like in Israel, there's a large just kind of like implied acceptance of suppression on social media, in the sense of I've seen it personally and I've seen it on wide scales like as well. It's the things that have outraged the international community in the past month. There have been videos of that in the US and in the UK and in Palestine and all across the world, where people are subjugated to this kind of oppression, but people just didn't listen, because it's all about the right timing. It's all about who posts it. It's all about if they're important enough. It's all about if enough people are listening. And so I think the internet is a good tool, but unfortunately for the majority of the world that I've seen that have really tried to use it as the way that the West describes it, as this good tool, have found it to be something that either gets them put in jail or something that just never gets heard, just gets taken down almost every single time. Yeah. And this isn't even controversial stuff, just normal stuff. And so it can be positive, but the more it goes unregulated, the more dangerous it's becoming, and the more mainstream it's becoming to just suppress voices for the sake of like capital, whoever's funding Facebook, whoever's funding Instagram.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, actually. Thank you for bringing that up. And actually, it makes me think of what happened on Blackout Tuesday. I don't think it was perhaps, I'm presuming that what you're saying was also from a Palestinian perspective. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think even in that case of the case of Blackout Tuesday, what I saw was that a lot of Black activists were being like, this is silencing. You know, they were kind of saying like, you know, we're missing the points of why this Blackout Tuesday was set up in the first place, which come from the music industry. So it's like a whole, like, it wasn't necessarily aimed at everyday peeps, you know? And yeah, I think that's a good point, actually, because there was kind of something that was supposed to be, it's not exactly what you were talking about, but it's like something that was supposed to be like a Black Lives Matter allyship action of sharing something online, and actually it was literally a black square. I mean, could you be more like, it was nothing. Like, it was literally empty for a lot of us who shared it, you know? So yeah, I think it can be a tool, but definitely I think it's important to point out its limits and to continually reflect on how we use social media and how it can be used to suppress certain voices, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's about time to wrap it up. Okay, we have another question. If there was no cultural appropriation, surely a result of that would be that minorities in oppressed culture would have no visibility in mainstream white culture. Is that not worse?
Sure.
Well,
I don't think that's necessarily true, because cultural exchange and cultural appropriation doesn't have to purely come from imperialistic like origins. Like there's loads of cultural exchange that happens in major cities that purely comes from immigrants and minority communities that do that to survive, you know, fusion restaurants, cool entertainment spaces, all those different things in which you get different sorts of cultural exchange can exist without it needing to be offensive. You know, it's just it's important for it to just, like, again, it just needs to be given the respect, you know, like when you have minority people that do things that are amazing, those cultures get recognized, there's appreciation. It's almost like, unfortunately, we get validated, you know, as if, because we constantly need to validate ourselves through our merits in order to qualify with white people. And so it's that also isn't, it's oppressive, but that's not like appropriating, you know. So there still will continue to be this sort of exchange as long as minority communities continue to exist and continue to want to amplify their own, you know, like as long as we continue being and we continue to try to be, then whether white people like it or not, we will be eventually.
And I think, just to add, you know, just the presence of Black people within the UK, the presence of Black people in the US, is that not like enough visibility? You know, just them being there and sharing their experiences without, you know, as I said earlier, like, appropriating a culture isn't going to solve racism. Like, just listening and being aware of Black people in your spaces and in your communities is, you know, is visibility. It's just white people need to acknowledge Black voices in a non-disrespectful way.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think we'll call it quits. I'm crazy tired and I don't want to fall asleep. But yeah, we just want to say thank you to everybody that joined. We'll put this out tomorrow. I'm not sure when our next seminar will be yet, but if you don't follow us on our Facebook page and Insta, which is whiteness with an X. And yeah, let's keep the conversation rolling.
Yeah, and thank you so much for everyone for sharing your thoughts, questions, like correcting us. Like, honestly, thank you so much. This was really, really, like, very, very informative. Top notch, guys. Or peeps. I need to use non-gendered language.
And no worries for asking all the questions. You inspired debate, so it was good.
I apologize. I'm learning so much from your questions too, you know?
Yeah, I just want to cement that, you know, we're learning from everybody. As I said, we're not just like pools of knowledge, or we're not dictators of knowledge. We're learning from everybody as well. So yeah,
thank you so much to everyone, and I guess we'll call it a day and hope to see you next time.